Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being with us this morning. My next guest is the General Secretary of the National Trade Union Centre, Mr. Michael Annisette. We're speaking this morning of the minimum wage and the adjustment to the minimum wage. But the Natuc has said a high minimum wage can actually help in terms of the crime situation here in Trinidad and Tobago. So to hear their arguments, I now welcome Mr. Annisette. Hello, sir. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, pleasant morning to you. Thanks for the invitation and blessings always to Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for joining me. Mr. Annisette, let's hear your arguments in regards to a further increase in the minimum wage could help with the crime situation in Trinidad and Tobago.
All right, what we are actually said is that we need to get away from the question of minimum wages. Because minimum wages is defined as the least amount of money that you can pay to a worker. And we have been arguing within the labor movement that the question of living on decent wages has to be the new conversation and narrative as we try to pull the poor and the workers on minimum wages out of poverty. And we would have demonstrated in a clear way that while the government would have said that they would have increased the wages for a 4-year period by 17 percentage points, it actually translates into 2050 multiplied by 173.3 because I'm doing a conversion into a monthly wage, what it represents the daily wage, okay? And it works out to $3,552.65. But our research would have demonstrated within the labor movement that a house in an ordinary place, 2-bedroom for a family, which is what family basically look for, 2 or 3 bedroom, but I'm dealing with the minimum amount of money that will be paid is $2,005 a month. So that if we take the $2,005 for a minimum wage earner and subtract that from the monthly salary, the worker is required to now live for the month on $1,052.65. The question is, and I think that is the conversation we have to have in Trinidad and Tobago, is that fair to ask a family of 4 to survive in Trinidad, given all what is happening with inflation and the increased cost, right, to live on $1,052.65? We have argued and we will continue to argue and say no, but more importantly, we would have used what I want to call a new approach in economics and in addressing wages. And it is the question of the purchasing power of working time. Let me repeat it. The purchasing power of working time. What does that mean to the people in Trinidad and Tobago? You have to take what is the minimum wage per hour and determine if I have to buy oil. And I deliberately went and got some prices at price band, which is supposed to be the lowest, and a Chinese place and in Massey. And it is amazing how those 3 different entities have different prices. But what we discovered is that if you buy an ordinary oil for a family, you have to pay almost $99. And in some instances it's $89, in others is $92. So I will have to work almost 2-point-something hours. No, 4-point-something hours. Sorry, in order to buy oil in Trinidad and Tobago.
When you say, sorry to interrupt. When you say ordinary oil, that sounds like a rather high price. Could you just, as silly as it may sound, what's the size of that bottle of oil?
That oil will be for a family, which is the liter all right, to last for a month. That is what we did. The bigger size, not the small little lamb size, but the oil that would last for a month. That is how we did our calculations. Okay, and that is the price. The price may vary from various groceries, like in extra food. The same price of that oil was $86. Okay, so it shows you the fluctuation of prices in Trinidad and Tobago because there is no control mechanism. And let me give you an example. Is that if we have to buy a loaf of bread for a family of 4, which would not last based on the sizes over a 2-day period or a 3-day period, you have to pay $17.50, and in some places it is $18.50. So you have to work 1 point something hours in order to buy a loaf of bread. And I think that is so startling that we do not pay attention to those kinds of realities. And that is why we are saying that minimum wages is substantially low and is really subsistent wages and does not address the issue of a family living comfortably when a family works for any company.
What's the correlation? Right. What's the correlation between the minimum wage and crime, especially in Trinidad?
All right. What has been demonstrated in our research that poverty levels within our society, and that has been discovered that there's a correlation between poverty and crime. And therefore, if you pay minimum wages, which in effect is poverty and subsistence wages, you are forcing people into poverty levels that is unseen in Trinidad and Tobago. And inevitably, what happens? The families, the children, is transition into crime. That is not Annisette saying. Those are the studies. And if you look at all the countries where you have massive crime, you will see that where there's poverty level, the guns and the drugs come in, and that takes over those young people's livelihood. It takes over the economy. It operates as a parallel economy. And therefore, we are saying within the trade union movement that those are facts that has been researched, not by Michael Annisette. We would have done our research too, but by the ILO and other institutions. And we need to look at our wages and also our educational system, because there's a suite of things that will bring about crime, but the two fundamentals are the educational system, the level of education, and the question of wages that is paid to those groups of workers and those groups of community.
Well, Mr. Annisette, let me ask you, if there were further increases in the minimum wage, there is a potential for job losses. Given that companies may not be able to fully pay their employees further increases, or the cost might be passed on to the consumer. That's just one aspect. There's so many aspects to this conversation. But with further job losses due to an increase in minimum wage, don't you think that might also lead to a life of crime?
No, but you see, I do not support the classical theory that when you increase minimum wages, that it ipso facto relates into loss of jobs. Okay? Why Michael Annisette and the National Trade Union Center and the labor movement is saying that? Let us look at the realities. We have had this saying about it when you increase the minimum wage. The minimum wage was increased, okay, 4 years ago. The minimum wage started at a particular time. Did we see any fallout as a consequence of that? The answer is no. Are we aware that the minimum wage in the United States is $7.25? But most of the states now are paying up to $15 in order to attract people and in order to keep the business going and the business rolling. because there's a nexus of when workers have real disposable income, the aggregate demands for goods and services increases. And when that increases, it pays somebody, it makes profit for the company, and it keeps your economy going. So you see, that philosophy have been told to us by neoclassical economists. We have also been told that let the market dictates where prices fall. Okay, and we would have seen that the market did not assist us in any way in that. When you had the financial crisis, is the government had to go and bail out these big companies.
Mr. Annisette,
So
let me interject just for a moment, and forgive me, given the time. I'm glad that you raised the United States as one argument, because there is a study by Zachary Fawn, Joseph Sabia, and Razul Cesar called The Unintended Effects of Minimum Wage Increases on Crime. This was a study conducted in the United States that collected data from 1997 to 2016. And the findings of this study says minimum wage-induced jobs actually could allow for increased criminal activity. For example, there's an increase in teenage and young adult arrests and an increase in crimes such as larceny. So they're actually saying that there is also a correlation between crime in the sense that there's no evidence that the minimum wage actually impacts in terms of violent crimes, in the sense that there's no decrease. If anything, there is an increase. This is a study conducted in the United States.
Yeah, but that is the point that I am making. And if you read the report properly, you're going to see that the minimum wages are paid to who? Students that are going to school and a lot of other people. But the point is, the point is that where a family do not have the ability in terms of disposable income, and that cannot be denied by any studies, to meet the basic needs of your family, inevitably there's poverty. And arising out of poverty, there is crime. Arising out of poverty, you see guns and ammunitions and drugs coming into the particular community as a parallel economy for that economy to grow. That is a reality. Look at Mexico. Look at what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago. What is causing the crime in Trinidad? It has to do with the poverty level, the disadvantaged communities, one, and our educational system that is throwing out workers, that are throwing out young people who cannot properly read and write. When you have a society, and then we hear less than 50% of the people pass their exams, that is a cause for deep concern in any society. And those societies that we would have studied, e.g. Switzerland, where crime is almost minimum, Singapore, one of the underlying factors, and some of the Asian countries, one of the underlying factors is proper wages and an educational system that prepared workers for the world of work, because that is the equalizer.
All right, Mr. Annisette, bear with us. We have to take a quick break here, but we'll continue the conversation for about 10 minutes afterwards. But those countries that you call, Singapore, for example, has such an efficient justice system, which is one thing. But Switzerland, the cost of living in Switzerland and Singapore is incredibly high. I don't think any trainees are willing to make such sacrifices.
No. But you're missing the point. When
you come back, we will continue. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. I'm joined by Mr. Annisette. Just about 5 more minutes we have for this conversation this morning. Well, Mr. Annisette, if you'd like to just continue where you left off.
All right. Okay, you were making the point of Switzerland, but let me tell Trinidad and Tobago and my listening public. The Organization for Economic and Social Development, they have done studies, and they had pinned a study on the 2 countries and other European countries that I'm calling, and what they would have thrown out from their studies. It has determined that the higher level of education, okay, is the less likely that the population goes to crime. And therefore, we are seeing that effect in Switzerland, we are seeing that effect in the European countries, and we are seeing that effect in Singapore and other Asiatic countries. The point that I'm making, in those pockets where you have poverty level, like in France, you have crimes there that is galloping. What is the reason? There's a lot of people coming in who are unable to get work, and it generates that spiral that is called crime. So we cannot deny that as a fact. And that is the argument that we are using in the trade union movement. But more importantly, although the cost of living rate in Switzerland is high, I have been there on several occasions attending ILO meetings, but the salaries and wages are compatible with the inflationary level, which gives the workers there the opportunity to have living and disposable income for them to survive, because Switzerland is one of the richest countries that you have in the world. So let us begin to understand that economics is driven by people and not necessarily by the balance of your dollars. Economic is driven by the fact of how you redistribute the wealth that is generated in any particular country. And if we go back to Singapore, Singapore has no natural resources. They even buy water from Malaysia. But look at where Singapore is in the context of the wealth ladder, but more importantly, in the context of crime. So let us begin to understand that we have to have that kind of conversation, one. And two, the trade union movement is saying that 2050, given the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago, is subsistence allowance, and we need to go away from that narrative and start the narrative on living wages for our workers. Do we want a society that have disposable income and living wages, or do we want a society that have subsistence allowance that creates poverties within our particular communities and the social vulnerability that arises out of that poverty wages and subsistence wages? That is the conversation that we want to have in the trade union movement.
Mr. Annisette, you know, I'm apologetic that this is where we'll have to actually conclude this morning. But I want to thank you nevertheless, because I enjoy our conversations. I remember off air on the telephone a couple days ago, I said, you know, we have to have this conversation and have a good debate. But I'm sorry we're going to have to pause this for given time.
I'm always constraints for having a debate, I think, which is critical at this time, given all what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago and the politics that is going on with the question of crime. All right, and we believe in the labor movement that in the context of crime, all the social partners and stakeholders must be part of that process in terms of how we deal with crime, and the community must be intimately involved in the process.
Well, thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
All right, same to you.
All right.
And your team of Trinidad and Tobago. Blessings always, as I always.
Thank you very much,
okay,
sir. And to you too. All the best. All right, ladies.